Welcome to Unleash Your Inner Goldilocks, how to get it just right. We gather week after week to talk about things that matter to us, to help us get our lives just right, and help us get our supportive communities working with each other to make our lives just right. And keeping along those themes and taking a page from Goldilocks. Today, I am going to be having a free flow of conversation with a longtime friend of the Goldilocks community and my co-host of Women Investing in Women, Robin Johnson. Welcome to Unleashing a Goldilocks.
It's always really great to be here. I've been coming to this in Los Angeles, 7 o'clock in the morning podcast for a few years now, maybe going on 3 years or so. And every Saturday it's just very inspiring and it's worth getting up for. So glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Robin. You and I met talking about the importance of integrity and humane ways in which we need to show up in the workplace and in community, and the importance of being ethical in everything we do, so that we truly build an inclusive community that allows for shared prosperity for everybody. And as we have built our relationship and the world has evolved, we're sitting at the intersection of all of the disruptions that are happening, whether it's the tech disruption with AI, whether it's the public policy disruption with tariffs and retaliatory tariffs. It's everything societally that is being impacted because of public policy, and the financial world completely transforming with everything that's going on in technology and the world around us. What are some of the concerns that you are seeing and hearing, both from inside the community and inside businesses as we support them?
I would say for me, the biggest problem is saying that black is white and white is black. Where people can look at a situation and know full well what it is. And because of other priorities or concerns or fears, say black is white and white is black. And there's a saying called words create worlds.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that we tend to put these pretty words around to make the truth more palatable. Extrajudicial killings. Okay, that's murder. Let's see, what's another one?
Disingenuous. We never say somebody lied. We say they're being disingenuous.
Yeah, and disinformation. Now, misinformation, that someone made a mistake, and then they go and they correct it. Disinformation is a lie. It's a pretty word for lying. And so we create these pretty words to shield ourselves and to shield society from the truth. And I think that's a really big concern. For example, a big hot one is socialism, which is a form of, government and economic policy, which typically does not have good success. But everyone's up in arms about this Zoran Mandani, who is, elected in New York City. Granted, it's New York City. New York City is an entirely different place than, Iowa City or Boise or even Los Angeles. And so that city created the person who fit for that city. And who is he running against? He was running against a criminal, Eric Adams, and against a person who assaults women, Cuomo. And so, if those are your choices, then yeah, if those are my choices, even though I don't personally like socialism, I'm going to vote for the Democratic Socialist. And, and so those are the types of things, is that what are our choices? Are we speaking openly? Are we speaking honestly? and calling a spade a spade.
Mhm. So it's interesting you brought these elements up, Robin, because ultimately the power of a human community is to hold competing ideas, respect them, value them, and function within them, right? Good and bad are two extremes of a spectrum, and there's all of else in between. Same way, socialism and capitalism are two extremes of an economic spectrum. And there is no country that is fully capitalist, and there is no country that is fully socialist. United States has social programs, social security, Medicare, public school. Even the publicly funded military is a social program. If we were a fully capitalist country, we would each have our own militia based on what we can afford, right? So there is no such thing as completely socialist or completely capitalist. And most European democracies are socialist democracies. They're socialist democracies because they provide education, healthcare, childcare as a taxpayer funded solution so that community looks out for community. It's another word, right? And when I think of Adam Smith's prescription of capitalism and Karl Marx coming right behind him and talking about why capitalism will not survive, he talked about the flaw in Adam Smith's assumption that morality will be the call of the day and social ostracization will force people to conform to social morals. And Karl Marx said that's the biggest lie because people are going to be fueled by greed. Greed is going to take over and capitalism is going to eat itself and socialism is going to rise because working class needs a voice. So if we understood this, and if we teach it right in the school, why aren't businesses making choices in a way that workers have a voice? Because the true wealth creation is by work, converting the raw material to a finished good or ideas into a service. Why wouldn't they have an equal seat at the table? And for capitalism to be viable, capital and labor has to sit side by side in equal power with regulation as the pivot. Like without regulation, we're driving a car without a braking mechanism. So we've broken a system that works, a system that built America. And now we're blaming the working class. And when the working class rises up, then people are uncomfortable with socialism because people in the United States tend to confuse socialism and communism.
Right.
Communism is a political framework. So is dictatorship. Capitalism and socialism are economic frameworks. And there are communist capitalists and there are dictatorship capitalists that are thriving very well. So you're right, we don't understand words, we mix things up. And then we also tell people you belong to this group, therefore you can't talk about this. You have to call black as white and white as black because we have to be on the same team. And all of a sudden, it's like everybody's lost their consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, this the definition of words, and I learned this. Oh, actually, let me back up and say I learned from you that because of those of you who don't know, Cass has her PhD in finance and did her dissertation on essentially the human side of business. I'm, parroting that down or ratcheting that down to a simple term. But I learned from you that before Adam Smith wrote Wealth of Nations, he wrote the theory of moral sentiments, which is talking about the human side, the moral component of money and wealth. He wrote that first, and then he wrote Wealth of Nations. And it's not called Wealth of Individuals, it's Wealth of Nations. If just a few people are extraordinarily wealthy, and the majority of people are living in abject poverty or just barely getting along, that is not a wealthy nation. And we're now starting to look at, in fact, this is part of the positive psychology movement or influence, is that there are some nations that are no longer using solely GDP as a source of wealth. One is called Bhutan, 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 and they are using like
Gross national happiness.
yeah, gross national happiness, where they're looking at what is the poverty level, what's the education level, what's the infant mortality level, what's the maternal mortality level, looking at those kinds of things. And I think that until we start doing that, then until we understand that and start measuring that, we're shortchanging ourselves.
I'm glad you mentioned it, Robin, because the young king of Bhutan proposed this to the United Nations, and the world measures GNH. United States measures it, but they keep the conversations for those global communities, never bring it in to the US conversation. So most of you here know me that I'm also a professor. When I'm in the classroom teaching finance and economics and GDP, I introduce GNH in every class. Because if as a business and as a governmental agency, we are not prioritizing this, and as a not-for-profit, we're not serving this, as a society, we're shortchanging us. In the end, the life we sustain is our own. And the analogy that comes to my mind is if I'm just happy as long as my dog is biting everybody else and keeping everybody away, when everybody goes, the dog is going to turn on me because I've treated it every time it bit a person. And when there is no other person, it's going to see me and say, I bite her, I get more treats, right? What are we doing? How is this coming back at us? And how is this shaping the world for our children and their future?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it really impoverishes ourselves. It impoverishes our businesses. And businesses that do not take into account the human side of business, they do not do as well. For example, here's a great example is during was it during the 2008 crisis, during one of the hard to keep track of them all, during one of the crises, the financial crises, there was a company, it was an airline, I can't remember which one it was, might have been US Airways. Anyway, it was an airline and they're having trouble, so they just started laying a bunch of people off. They laid a bunch of people off, and hey, the next quarter or two of their stock looked really good. Well, Southwest said no. At least that point in time, they said no, we're not going to do that. We'll furlough people. Hey, people start working less. Maybe let's reduce our salaries to kind of keep more people on as much as possible. Well, they did that to try to, hey, we're going to hang in together and weather through this. Well, then after a couple of years, this other airline, they went out of business. They went out of business. Southwest continued on. Now, I don't know if today Southwest continues with that philosophy. I'm not sure, but that was a good example. The other example, and this popped into my head, there's a wonderful little magazine called Guideposts. And it's a religious magazine talking about, lots of stories about how God or goodness impacted people. There was a really delightful story about this man who took a job for the trash company. He'd ride on the back of a trash truck and have to pick up, garbage cans and dump it into the back of the trash truck. And after one day, he said, "Oh my gosh, this is a horrific job." But he needed the money. He had to have a job. So he said, "You know what? I'll keep doing this for now to make it fun." So he started like on Halloween, he'd dress up like a clown, on Valentine's Day, he'd dress up with hearts or something. Anyway, he started putting on these funny costumes, riding on the back of the truck. And so the whole neighborhood got to know him, loved him, is just a fun article. Well, I went back and read the article again, and then one thing jumped out at me. He said, even though he is working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, he wasn't making ends meet. And I thought, how could you be doing this really hard manual labor, ucky job, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and not make ends meet? Well, my next question was, well, how much is he getting paid? My next question was, well, how much is the president of that company getting paid? My next question was, well, why don't we have the president of that company do that man's job for a week or even a day and then decide how much am I going to pay him? And so we could eliminate most poverty, not all, but most poverty overnight by simply paying people more. That means the top CEO, he's going to get, instead of getting 50 million, maybe he'll get 2 million. But you can live pretty well on 2 million a year. So once again, we have control over this. We just, to what degree do we do it?
Mm-hmm. And absolutely, businesses have to start having a conscience. And now we're seeing that businesses are taking a stance that AI can do this. We don't need people. And the $1 million question for me is, yeah, okay, let AI do all the manual work. Let AI do all the office desk jobs. People are laid off. Who are you going to sell all of this to? Other AI is not going to buy it. You still need the humans to buy it. So why would you kill your market? We're not just workers. We are consumers. We are citizens who vote. We're investors who invest through our 401k. Do people sit there and think about the circular nature of this ecosystem? And we all play multiple roles. Now, New York is a perfect example of workers being treated poorly without thinking that these are consumers and voters. And the one thing Zoran Mamdani did during the crisis is after the crisis, when Uber and Lyft came out, the medallions for taxis that cost millions of dollars per medallion all of a sudden plummeted to a few hundred thousands. And so all the taxi drivers and taxi owners went broke. They were in debt. And the city that minted money for selling medallions for millions of dollars all of a sudden stepped back and allowed the businesses to make a profit. Zoran protested as a councilman, protested and worked with the local legislature to change that and bring the prices down by half, and then put a debt relief plan and get them back in their personal life on the right track. That's the reason everybody went and voted for him, because he understood and cared about the working man. And he stood up and did something instead of siding with the corporations. So the future is going to be, we as citizens get the choice. If we can stop calling black as white and white as black, in a democracy, we get to choose. And I think New York, city of New York, and the people of New York just gave us a blueprint. It really doesn't matter the labels because they're secondary, right? Because Robin, we can sit here and say, Robin, you're American, I'm Sri Lankan, and one of our guests here, Dr. Menon, is Indian. Doesn't matter, we're human, we each have a soul. And we show up for a reason with a purpose, right? Mm-hmm. If we can see beyond that outer layer and we can truly show up for each other and we stand up and speak our truth is a shared truth.
Absolutely beautiful. Another thing I'll throw in real quickly, I know that our time is just about up, is that until people have a sense of history and they understand how things came to be, then you're really at a disadvantage. And I thought I was pretty smart. I love history. I was pretty smart. But I have learned so much that I didn't know. And there's so much information now. Heather Cox Richardson on Substack, Joyce Vance on Substack, Ruth Ben Guyot, Ann Applebaum, Steve Vladek, who are a bunch, so many people that approach things from a historical view. I'll just throw this out real quickly because it's germane to what we're talking about, is the words, and I learned this from Heather Cox Richardson, the word socialism always kind of had a bad connotation, and so people would shy away from it. Well, after the Civil War, we have all these free blacks, in these communities and they say, hey, we want roads, we want schools, we want hospitals. Now, these roads, schools, and hospitals, they would have benefited everyone, including the poor whites. Well, they can only be provided through taxes. How are you going to pay for it? You have to have taxes. Well, the only people who had money and property to be taxed were the white slave owners. And so when the community came and said, we're going to tax you to provide these things which are going to benefit blacks, they said, oh, that's socialism. You're taking our money and you're taxing our property. That's socialism. And that is then how socialism, anything for the public good, then gets labeled as socialism, and then that's a bad word, and
That's only in
what
the
started.
United States. That's a
Yeah,
US perspective. It is not the European perspective. It's not the Asian perspective. I come from a society of taxpayer funded education and taxpayer funded healthcare. Robin, if you're visiting Sri Lanka and you get sick and we need to give you a heart transplant, we will give it to you on our taxpayer money. We're a socialist democratic republic. That's our classification.
yeah,
A lot of these Northern European countries are socialist democracies. It's
yes,
working well with them. They are one of the top countries in happiness and quality of life index because we share what we have instead of, I mean, technically the few rob from the hardworking people. We don't call it robbing. We just say they're making profits, right? And so this is what I want us to leave with as we wrap this conversation up. We are in this together, and our outer wrappings don't define us. The soul that embodies the gift from our maker, that is what defines us. So if we come from that place of true humanity with humaneness, we don't look at three puppies and say, oh, that's a brown puppy, I don't want it. That's a black puppy, I don't want it. I just want a white puppy, and oh, that's a polka dotted puppy, I don't want it. No, we treat them all the same. A puppy is a puppy, it evokes the same emotion. Why do we do that with humans? Why in God's green earth do we do that with humans? And truly, if we go and look at the world, all the major religions came out of one part of the world, Asia as a continent. Whether it's South Asia or West Asia, which we call Middle East today, it all came from the same place. It came from the people who looked the same. Let's stop whitewashing everything. Look at each other as truly our human fellow travelers. Because in the end, we're all going home to our maker, and all we're doing is walking each other home. And if we take our life from that perspective with that kindness, with that compassion, and as a business, know that we are supporting lives and in the process making a profit, then we can all do well by doing good. As I open this up for conversation, Nandini, you've been hearing this conversation, and any thoughts you have, any
Oh,
questions?
yeah, so many thoughts. I don't know if I can just succinctly put it down into like two or three. But I do have I found a lot of interesting takeaways. Like the first one was the concept of um, economic framework versus political framework. And I was wondering, and I know you're both teachers and you probably both teach this in your classes, but I was wondering if there's and I guess that's what Goldilocks is doing, to kind of bring it in more into the main space of discussing what you said, the difference between words, and I'm wondering how teaching is going to change, because with AI now there's like a caveat everywhere that says, some of this information may be irrelevant or wrong. And so how do you think this is going to impact society, where we're not sure where information is coming from and we're not sure if what we're learning is actually correct and truthful?
Well, the thing with AI is we have to be very specific in what we ask. right? Language is culture, and the winners write their own version of history, which is not the truth of the history. So if we only learn in one language, if we learn in the European colonial masters' language, then we will have their version of the history. In our part of the world, Nandini, when I got my degree in India, it was a requirement to have two language literatures as majors along with your triple major so that you have unbiased research. United States has a exclusive engineering and physics school, Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology in Terre Haute, Indiana. It's owned by the family that runs Indy 500, the races. You have to learn Russian to go to that school. Because if you're going to be a physicist and an engineer and a space researcher, you better know your Russian research as well, not just the US research. So, the same way, if we're only training the AI on English history, English context, then it's going to bring all of that in. How do we ask the question? When I'm using AI, I am forcing it to go and look at Eastern and Western literature, Eastern and Western history. I'm asking it questions and asking it to present to me with the reference sources and links to the sources for me to validate what it's saying. And AI will lie. AI is only 60 to 62% accurate. It will make up stuff, it will fabricate. And then we just keep pushing. I ask it to write a 50-word blog, 500-word blog, and it'll write 350 words and tell me it counted right. And then I show it that it counted wrong and it hasn't taken multiple perspectives. You have to push the AI. You have to believe that it's a 13-year-old who believes he or she knows more than you. And it's telling you what to do, right? So it's never completely right. I mean, think about the fact that the White House had AI look at countries and come up with tariffs, and they tariffed to Penguin Island 25%. I mean, that's the funniest and the most absurd example I can give. And we made public policy around it. Nobody checked.
Yeah, another thing on the AI is that you must read what AI has produced, and then you need to massage it so it sounds like your voice. You need to make sure that they're saying is correct. And so I know that there's a lot of fear that you know, people will be displaced, and they probably will be, but historically, every new technology actually overall makes more jobs, makes more opportunities. Like look, when the car was invented, hey, everybody making wagons, you know, a lot of them went out, couldn't make wagons anymore. They had to figure out something else. Couldn't make as many buggy whips. But look at everything that has come from the automobile industry. And, looking at when computers came around, when I was in college, my first year of the MBA program, 1982, I'm writing my papers with a legal pad and a pen. And my friend says, Robin, there's this new thing called a computer. I don't know. I like my legal pad and my pen. Listen, just try it. Just try it. Went and tried it. Whew, away goes my legal pad and my pen, and now I'm on the computer. And so the people making legal pads, they had to make fewer legal pads. They do something else. So every new technology is going to spawn more technology, but you have to always have that human element, or you're going to have big mistakes.
I was listening to a bunch of technology innovators and leaders talk about the purpose of technology is to make the human labor easy, but the human needs to be in the loop. And for the human to be in the loop, the human has to evolve. Some countries say that when you hire our people, as your technology evolves, you need to evolve the people. You can't take the best we produce and then dump them when technology changes. Now, the so-called socialist countries do this. You can't just hire and fire and downsize. The taxpayers educated people and produced world-class workers that you hired. You don't hire world-class workers and then not take them along for the journey as you technologically innovate and evolve. You evolve them too. So countries that have that as a public policy doesn't have to worry. The countries that say, well, you can hire at will and fire at will and you don't have to give an explanation. Now public policy is shaped based on how we vote. Why are we voting like we're going to be a lottery winner next year or next month and then screw everybody else, right? So how the attitude with which we vote is what dictates our life. And if 99% of us are not the wealthy, why are we voting like we're Elon Musk?
So I guess that's where I was coming from, to ask, like, how do we bring the people to where they understand that they can't just, because they can't just read something and just believe it, because that is essentially 80% of our population. I mean, if you look at your WhatsApp and your Instagram and all these social media, Facebook, and, people just like forward. They don't even verify. They don't even know if it's correct information. And that extra step of like verifying, like, okay, am I sending something that's actually vetted and correct? That's no longer being done. And that comes back to what you said, Kas, about, the countries that actually bring their population up with them, with the new technology. Those are the ones that are going to succeed. And my concern, and it's happening in medicine too, where people read something online and they come and they ask me questions and then they don't believe my answers because it's not on social media. Some people believe like treatments on WhatsApp forwards than they do me when I've been doing medicine for like years and actually been to school. So how do we combat that? How do we lift the people up, I guess, is my question.
So wonderful question. Businesses like Facebook and Instagram have figured out that the profit is made through cognitive dissonance because anger, fear, and hate drive more action than happiness and love. Happy people and love don't get messed up with other people, right? They're in their own bubble. So they intentionally propagate this cognitive dissonance. And then they also only feed you what you believe. So they're reinforcing your biases. So they create cognitive dissonance, identify people, put them in buckets, and then propagate that bias so that everything you see is just that. Therefore, you believe that's what the world is. And the only way to get out of this is to get people out of social media and into community. And in a way, I am thinking this AI wave is going to force people to reach out to each other because they're going to see the human side, as Robin always says, the human side of life is what makes life possible.
Yeah, another thing too is I think that choosing to expand our sources of information. If you're only looking at one type of source, you're living in a bubble. For example, when I'm on the road and I have access to TV, I will flip between CNN, Fox News, and NBC. I just flip back and forth and back and forth and hear from one, hear from one. And then you get kind of a more expanded view of maybe you don't agree with what they're saying. And in many instances, you can see flat out that they're lying. But at least you're getting a perspective of, okay, I understand why this person thinks the way they do because they're only looking at this perspective, but looking at multiple perspectives. In fact, I was listening to one podcast where a person who had been a very extreme person, and they had gotten out of that. The moderator said, "Well, what was the process that got you out of that really extreme position?" He said, I started listening to other newscasts. I started listening to other sources of information. And so I think that is important, either on the left or the right or the middle, having multiple sources of information and being able to judge them off and compare them, I think that's really, really important.
That's brilliant, Robin. And I would say add one step further. Watch news that is outside of the US perspective. Watch BBC, watch Reuters. If you're a multilingual person, go and read the news or watch the news in another language, because news is pivoted based on the language of the culture too. Like CNN Spanish and CNN English doesn't tell the same story with the same words, because they have to appeal to the Hispanic community. They will brownwash it a little, right? So I'm playing on words with whitewashing there. So, and it truly is up to us. And then have a community where you can actually have these conversations. I'm sure, Robin, you grew up in a household where people sat and talked and discussed taking different perspectives. I remember growing up, we are Hindus, but Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve were holidays, right? Public holidays all over the world. And we would all in the community get together. Everybody does a dish, have a potluck. And 4 or 5 generations will sit around and have intellectual conversations. Hey, kid, what do you think about this? Oh, grandma, how does this affect you? We had conversations in the neighborhood, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, multi-generational. Those conversations are important. What if we got back to a dinner table as a family? Put the phones aside and talk.
Yeah, interestingly, I actually did not grow up in a family where there's a lot of discussion like that. It's a very conservative family, which I'm very grateful for. I still consider myself conservative. But, or I should say, and our family was very focused on love your neighbor, be of service, do good, pray for your enemies, do good to everyone. So even though we had this, what some people might say, very close-minded perspective about some things, my parents would give you the shirt off their back. My mother was very sick. She had many, many, many health problems growing up, my entire life, many health problems. But every Tuesday night, she would make dinner for a woman who was more sick than her. And every Tuesday night, we would take dinner over to Sister Kanister. We would take dinner to her, even though my mom was sick. She made dinner for someone else. So being able to, regardless of where you stand, if you can, love your neighbor and try to do good to those around you, I think that's a bigger story.
Thank you, Robin, and truly appreciate your question, Nandini. It truly opened up the conversation to a whole new level. The world and the socioeconomic conditions and the environmental impacts we are causing through it, they don't look at zip codes and race and color and age and religion. It affects everybody. So if we understand that as a fact, the crisis hurts everybody, whether it's an economic crisis, social crisis, public policy crisis, or a nature crisis. So what if we all came together? What if we all came together the same way we came together after 9/11? What if we stayed in that state every day and supported each other? And that's the question we ask ourselves, and we remind you to ask yourself as you kick off the week ahead and go about your business. Think that every person next to you is dealing with it, the same situation, maybe in a slightly different way. And what if we held space for each other? What if we stopped and talked? Maybe, just maybe, we can build the world we need.